Hello, 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 and welcome to a new episode of the Needle Movers podcast, the podcast that brings you the lessons, concepts, and books we wish we'd known earlier on in our lives. This is one of the book club series, and it's following up from a previous episode we did on The Good Ally, the book by Nova Reid. I'm joined, as always, with my co-host, Valerio and myself.
I thought you forgotten my name for a second, but then you screwed it up.
No. What I did was not say my own name, of course, which is Mark Jason's. It's a bit of a backwards one. But this is the second part to a two-part episode. So if you haven't heard, go back and listen back. I think this is 3 podcasts ago, where we covered a few topics from our book, which include the question of whether racism is still a problem, or if racialized fragility and anti-blackness, how those are prevalent in the world today. But here we're going to continue and cover the topics more about microaggressions and white privilege.
There is a fair bit that's happened ever since we recorded the first part of this episode, right?
Very true, yeah.
We changed prime minister in this country. If you are new to this bit of news, maybe worthwhile opening up the BBC. But for the first time ever, we have a prime minister from a nation background.
First time from a Caucasian background, right? From my understanding, in the UK, it's the first time in 200 years or so where we've got, diversity amongst the prime ministers here.
Correct. And I think it's fair to say I've seen some clips, some TikToks, some YouTubes, and there has been a lot of various comments that have been made around this new prime minister. So it's quite interesting that it's happened now. History is being made, but also the topics we're covering today are ever so relevant to what is happening in this country.
So let's start with microaggressions. I guess the question here is, what is microaggression? Actually, funnily enough, if you've heard our previous episode by now, which you should have, you'd already know that I've yet to read this book. And Valerio was kind of, I guess, probing and asking me about them. But when it comes to microaggression, this is a term used for commonplace daily verbal, behavioral, or environmental slights, whether intentional or unintentional, that communicate hostile, derogatory, or negative attitudes towards stigmatized or culturally marginalized groups. That's very long-winded to take in. The term was coined by Harvard University psychiatrist Chester M. But basically, it's common. The reason why they're micro is because they're small and they can be unintentional. I think we kind of mentioned this before. In fact, we mentioned it on our previous episode where we had Lakshmi Priya as a guest, and we were stating about people who will say slights or things, but not recognize that they are derogatory in a way. And that's why they're so commonplace, is because it's just, oh yeah, but it's just jokes, or you're nice for an ex person or things like that.
I've taken the liberty of researching a few more microaggressions just to paint the picture a little bit further. So one of the really good ones is complimenting a person that has been raised in the UK or the US and telling them, your English is really good just because they're not white.
That also makes me think of before, and I'm not sure if it still happens in the news, there would always be the compliment given to minorities of any kind that were not Caucasian, that they spoke so well. Like if they had to choose anything about them, it was like, they were so well spoken. Versus what expectation? It was so weird, and it happens so much. It'll be like, what can you say if you had to say something nice about them? What would you say? They were really well spoken. That's about it.
And another one of my all-time favorites is going up to someone and having a conversation, asking them, where are you from? And they tell them, I'm from, I don't know, somewhere around Leicester. And then they turn around and ask, no, where are you really from?
I've had that as well. Where are you really from? I feel like people don't know how to ask it. What's your ethnic origin? I still sometimes, because I can ask, or I'll be curious too. But I guess, no, not even I guess. I know the phrasing and the way people ask it is basically saying, you aren't from here, you're other, and please don't imply that you are. You know what I mean. You know what I'm asking you when I see that. And it can, again, this is why they're called microaggressions. It might, and I guess for people reflecting on, I've done that before, it doesn't negate the fact that it is a microaggression. It just means that you might have partook and not been aware, thus intentional or unintentional. Right.
The other one on the list is when I see you, I don't see color. You know, this country is a melting pot. The hell is a melting pot.
I love it. It's a melting pot, so therefore I don't have to see it anymore. It doesn't exist. It's like that was the first part, right? It doesn't even still exist. I don't see color. The color blindness that erases all history and erases all culture. That like, it's so weird. I know it's an artificial construct, but once you made it and it exists, that's like words in the dictionary in the English language. They're here now. They might get changed and shaped or mangled, but they're still here, and it's not like they just disappear because they were constructed.
I'm still going, by the way. I still got a few more that I gotta go through.
Tell me more. Tell me more. I'm curious.
So this is a really good one, and it's not so much something that you do; it's more of an action. So, for example, a white man or a woman clutching a purse or crossing the street because they see a black man or a brown man walking by in their direction. You know, just the act that you assume that the person walking in your direction could be of an aggressor just because of the color of the skin, and you know, clutching your purse and changing direction altogether, that's considered a microaggression as well.
It's kind of weird because it's like I feel like their argument back would be, well, what if I stay on the side and then I get robbed? It's like like I do this out of courtesy, and I've seen the jokes where people go a bit too far and they like just try and get hip with it or whatever, and making the old, I guess, the opposite stereotype of maybe they're jovial and they like to dance. I don't know, because it's yes, class. I think, yeah, when it comes to race, it's more clear, but when there's class and there's other like gender bias or things that can still result in a microaggression. These ones, that one's like clear cut, but I feel like there's so many people that can be impacted by just, I saw them and I felt a type of way, whether it's ableism, ageism, sexism, racism, all the isms. Why aren't isms good words? Yeah, isn't there a good ism?
Okay, I got two more that I'm gonna stop. The next one, it makes me chuckle because I've seen this like happen in the last probably couple of months. Someone makes a really terrible remark, and then you point it out to them, and they reply, "I'm not a racist. I've got a black friend."
Oh yeah, you have to have a from insert whatever I've just insulted here and say I can't be. I've got this. And I remember a few years ago where it was in the news where someone had said it, and they like posted a picture of them with all. And when I say someone, I'm pretty sure there was a politician, of course. Who else would do things like this? But they posted.
I feel like this was Boris Johnson.
No, it would have been too easy, and also I'm not convinced he has any. So, but no, they definitely posted like pictures of every time they interacted, which I don't know, for whomever thinks that is still a justifiable thing to say, just understand, if you're able to count, or if you do count, or if you have to rely on that as your defense, that means that you probably are more racist than you even would believe. It's like, well, I've definitely got some. And they gave me a pass. So no, yeah, I feel like that's schoolyard rules before you realize real life. And it just, oh man, I don't know why we get back to this episode. I was so joyful until I realized our topic of the day. What's your last one? Yeah,
the very last one. It's actually really bad in my opinion. So this is a true story from a black lawyer. I think she worked in the US, and every time that she went to court, she was being mistaken for a convict instead of anyone assuming that she was there as a lawyer.
This kind of reminds me of experiments done, which I learned years ago in psychology, where they'd show two people and they'd show them holding things, and then people would just assume the black guy was holding a knife. Even though it was like a book or whatever, it doesn't matter. It's like, oh, it must have been something sharp. It must have been. And I think here we're kind of oversimplifying it in a sense, because there are the background reasons, and it could be social media expo, or what you've learned in school or what you've not learned in school, and all the things that have provided the absence to be aware of, oh, I have these stereotypes or these things in mind, or my default is this, or I feel nervous when I walk past X, due to a gap in Y that was not provided by society. But still, the result is the same. And I think that's the point we're getting to. We might be talking about a symptom rather than the cause, but the symptom's still there. And the first thing is, if you can identify the symptom, then maybe you can question yourself and figure out what is causing it. And I guess one thing I'd say is that microaggressions are not limited to just racial affairs, right? Like there's other examples of sexist microaggressions, which can include addressing someone by using a sexist version of a name, or a man refusing to wash dishes because it's women's work. In fact, of recent blowing up is Andrew Tate, who's like misogyny embodied. But the thing about Andrew Tate, when I think about it, is he's just the latest in a run of it. So he's the flavor of the month per se, and he's promoted by smaller, younger YouTubers called Sneeko. And if you don't know who Andrew Tate is, he won't say he's a misogynist, but he basically believes a woman should be one way and a man should be another. And then he'll back, bolster it by saying, I love women, I respect women, I love women, but also stay in the kitchen, don't make above this, give me a percentage of your income, all these things.
It's like he loves his own view and perception of what a woman should be, but he doesn't like the realistic image of what truly a woman should be.
Exactly. But when I think back, I'm like, oh, he blew up recently, but there was a man called, rest in peace, Kevin Frederick. No, not Kevin Frederick. I got the name totally wrong. Kevin Samuels. Kevin Fredericks is a hilarious comedian. Kev on stage. Kevin Samuels, I think. And he passed, but he was also saying rules, and he was doing these calls in where we would call, and he'd basically tell them they don't deserve a high value man. But then there was a different podcast called Fit and Fresh, which is funny. I'm kind of publicizing these people. Go ahead and listen to them, see their views and stuff. But my point here is it's just the latest in the trend of men with specific views, and they kind of align with this, what's women's work versus what is, a man's work, and saying, so I'm not going to wash dishes, or I won't do this. And it's kind of weird because it aligns with being chivalrous in some aspects, right? I'll do these things because of it. So there's depending on when you look at the full coin versus the half that you'd like from it, you're like, oh wait, this has gone very dark. But then there's more, right? So if you're in at places, say your workplace or something, where people display nude pinups of women, right, or in their place of employment, and so for them it like cultures that boys club, and thus is a microaggression because you disrespected or not allowed the woman. And that kind of reminds me of, I heard from my boss before, where there is certain construction sites where they don't have women's toilets, and they don't even expect to, because they're just so used to having boys. And when it's called out, like, what are you doing? It's like a legal requirement. They're like, oh no, we don't need that here. Which is major aggression in a way. And and again, even more straightforward ones, like someone making unwanted sexual advances towards another person. And I think it's it's crazy in a sense, because I recall being in school and the way guys would act towards just teachers they found attractive, and just decide, if they've built a backstory in their head that they like it, then they'll believe it like it's true, like anyone's agreed with that, no matter what they're saying. So then people will try and pinch bums and do things like, oh, she wants it, based on what? Based on the story you've made. And it's very, like, I don't know, traumatizing for people. It's crazy. And then there's the I guess common microaggressions where people just judge based on weight. So they're like, oh, you could lose some weight, you should lose some weight, gain some weight, whatever, get thick in the right places. Unwanted commentary. And I guess that's where you think back to the wolf whistles and things on the street, which is, if you don't empathize, you never think, oh, how would it be to have someone who is way stronger, capable of doing damage to you, just deciding to scream whatever catcall you in a way where you don't want it, and or in the office just making unwanted comments about yourself, and just thinking it's fine. And I like to try and think of some things in balance, like, oh yeah, but with friends it's banter, but it's not. If it's your place of work, it's not for it. And
it's a good point, because we covered this in the episode with Lakshmi Priya last week, when she was on the receiving end on what was classified as office banter. But the office banter is what we hide behind, is the name that we hide behind when we do something which is borderline or even like straight on inappropriate. And we just use the term office banter to cover up for it. And place yourself in this almost like this shield or this comfort blanket that we're okay doing it because, you know, we have this relationship with this person, and because we got this relationship, we're okay to have office banter. But it's not okay.
I think as well, there's a lot of accommodating that goes on. So people who haven't been made aware until kind of recently that they've been accommodated. Therefore, they'll do stuff and think it's fine because no one called them out. And then recently people be like, don't do that. Don't say that. That is rude. That is sexist. That is homophobic. That is racist. That is, and I guess once you've built a character which says, I am not none of any of those things, hearing or getting called out for that, the defense goes 12 and it just is, it's banter. You're way too sensitive. Oh, look at this. What is it? Is it thing? And it's just, you feel uncomfortable because someone told you, gave you feedback you did not like, right? Take a second and reflect on yourself. And if you're like, it's fine, it has to be fine because I'm not like that. I think, and this is a different book entirely, but I think when I was reading up on, and I can't remember which one, maybe we'll recall it or we've done it before, where they was checking into sexual assault. Maybe it was a podcast, but when they were doing a check on sexual assault, they went onto campuses and they realized this. Not only did the guys not know they'd done it or understand it, the women didn't actually classify, even though they described exactly what it meant, like they've gone through the trauma of it, they wouldn't call it or classify it as that because that is too traumatic in name. And therefore it's, like I said, been accommodated. And it's just like, oh, I had this experience where X had Y happened to me. And it's like that, okay, but have you ever been sexually assaulted? No, never. And it's that disconnect where it's like a lot of things are happening and people aren't, I guess, familiar, aware, or able to call it out in that. And that's where you get people defending acts that they've gone through like it's fine. So someone could be calling and they'll be saying, it's just bants. It's just bants. It's like you've been deluded into believing the hype because no one called it out. You're accepting of it. And that's kind of when it goes through the generations, right? Where previous generations of Black people were called the N-word so strongly, so consistently, that the fact that they're not called that anymore is a win. And it's like, why are you still chanting? Why are you still protesting? We did it. We're done. And it's like, no, your base level was horrible. And my base level now, I hopefully in like years and years and years is still horrible compared to the next one because we just keep making forward movements. But yeah, I keep going on rants in this. Part 2 of Mark Jason keeps going on rants.
No, there's a couple of things that you said that tie into to my next point. And we talked about that comment that we hear that, you know, this country is a melting pot, racism is not a problem anymore. And people get that impression purely on the basis that, oh, we don't go out anymore and use the N-word, or we don't go out and are outrageously racist towards people. Yes, we may not be doing that anymore, or there may be isolated cases where that happens, but just because that doesn't happen, it doesn't mean that this country doesn't have a racism problem. Racism comes in many, many different forms. Microaggression is one of those forms. And there has even been studies comparing a one-off outrageous racial event versus a series of microaggression, and they looked at what level of psychological impact it's had on the receiver of the microaggression versus the outrageously racist comments, for example. And it turns out that ongoing microaggression that happen on a regular basis are much more impactful at a psychological level than a one-off event. It's almost the same difference of being exposed to a one-off stress versus being constantly exposed to a certain level of stress day in and day out to the point that it cripples you. And that's the sort of consequences that microaggression can have at a psychological level.
It's like erosion, right? Where just to get a droplet of water. In fact, recently I went on holiday and I went to the caves in Slovenia, and inside the caves you see, like, I've forgotten what they're called, which is terrible. Stalactites or I don't know, but there's the way the cave formations are made, and it's just rocks that have been just driplets of water constantly dropping. And I'm gonna get annoyed that I don't remember the names, but they like form these Huh? No, not
Limestone?
limestone. It's
Oh.
like magtides, and it depends on which one it is. If it comes from the ground, it's called something, and if it comes from the roof of the cave, it's called something else. Please feel free to Google it while I discuss it. But basically, lots, just driplets of water over thousands of years has formed these amazing structures that kind of look like candle wax from stone, from you know what I mean? And that's because it's just a small, steady, consistent drip. And that's what people go through, that pain, which will just erode or change someone. And then people ask, why do you seem so angry? Why do you seem so crazy? Why do you like it on a scale of 1 to infinity? There wasn't a one-off act. And that's what people expect when it comes to racism, sexism, all types of discrimination. Like, oh, it was a big thing. Like George Floyd had to die, versus someone going around and being like, yeah, I make jokes about black people all the time, or I make jokes about women all the time, and it's not even funny. It's just straight racist. I'm not a comedian. I'm just a person who's saying things because I feel a type of way, and I'm hiding behind a shield of it. And then people, or that person being told to just deal with it, live with it, ignore it, whatever, that happens. But like we say, on an ongoing basis, like you remove yourself from it, you do whatever, but you're now adapting to allow that person to live, and no one's adapting to allow you to live. And it's kind of well, it has impacts, clearly. It has social impacts. It has huge impact, which people are only just kind of recognizing of recent, where they're like, oh yeah, institutional racism might exist. And the thing, again, even when you think about that, is that when it's institutional, I think people limit the institutes in their mind. So they're like, oh, God damn it, these housings, maybe the schools, could be the police. No, no way. let me stick with what I can understand, or allow, or consider, or even accept personally that could be the case. And we already, which is weird to me, only because it's history is just clear cut when it's like, we did not like women, we did not like certain races, and then it gets really ambiguous and it was like, and then we did. It's like, how did everyone not acknowledge the fact and just was like, oh, it's fine now? And it's like, I don't think we did. I think to this day, to this very particular day, there are a lot of things ingrained in our society that still hold certain people back. And just because they make it in spite of it, or with accommodations now, and I'm not saying it's not been mountains of progress, it's not acknowledged, or it's ignored like it's all fixed. And I would basically, it's not fixed, and it is always a good thing to make sure you're at least as a small impact checking yourself, and then check your friends, and that could help, because otherwise you could end up being a silent part of the problem.
So got a question for you. What have you been on? Probably the answer is going to be yes, but have you been on the receiving end of microaggressions, and would you be comfortable with sharing a couple of examples?
No, I've never been on the series. Only from you. You are the most microaggressive and macroaggressive person I've ever met in my life. Yeah, probably. I just don't. Yeah, so I've had the "you're not like other black people" one, or I'm not usually into. I don't know. I'm trying to think. It's you know what? There's two ways I'd like to approach this, which is the one where I'm like, have I been on the receiving end? Yes, most likely. Have I been on the, what's that word, supplying end? Most definitely as well, right? I can always play victim. I've definitely been a victim to it. I don't recall either, but I do know that during my process of becoming who I currently am, I grew, and to grow meant I made mistakes, and some of my mistakes were definitely saying stupid stuff or things before I learned. And the reason I'm going, rather than answering your question, because I just don't have the memory of like a specific time right now, is saying I wasn't just someone who was aware of these things, is because I think a lot of the audience is too. And so before I knew the words microaggressions existed, I had stereotypes or mindsets or said words that were insulting from school. And then I grew up and I heard they were wrong. And I think the first thing was act first. Like, okay, I'm not going to use that, and then try and understand. And I think people don't want to do that. They're like, I just want to keep using the words. I just want to keep doing these things. And that's when they're like, can I say the N-word? But I'm a good thing, or he's a safe thing. And and they'll try and utilize it. But I think that's why I'm saying self-reflect and check. And I'm like, I don't have the impact from certain things. Like anti-Semitism doesn't impact me, but I know it impacts a whole different culture. I know LGBTQ plus issues don't directly impact me, but they impact my friends. And so it's that, and it's kind of empathy, but it's also kind of awareness to say, just because I don't yet understand certain things doesn't mean I shouldn't do some things to recognize they exist and amend my actions. So yeah, if I had examples of when I've had it, yeah, I've heard that I don't see race, or I have Black friends after they've done something that's kind of ridiculous, or not even. And the thing is, there's a difference. Like the once upon a time, me and my siblings, I'm not sure if I mentioned this on this episode, we were going to look at properties to buy, and we go to a neighborhood, and the neighbor is friendly with us because he wants to explain how we seem like good people, good Black people, but there's these people who live there already in the street who are Nigerian, and they make the smelly food and they're so loud. And he's explaining this to us, and we're laughing and smiling and nodding along as we confirm we're definitely buying this house because we're Nigerian and it sounds like there's good food down the road. We can make friends and have party. But it was just like, so that's not even micro. It's just like, okay, interesting.
Good intel,
yeah.
right?
Yeah. I was like, oh, thanks. You're not gonna like what happens next. But we seem like good, whatever race he thinks we are. Yeah, I don't know. I'm sorry if that didn't fully answer, but it kind of is what you're gonna get in a sense. How about
sorry?
Go on. I was gonna say, how about yourself? Because you are a cis white male, but you're also a foreigner inside of the UK. And I say this because you actually moved and you have this accent regardless of status. So it's like at some point you were a foreigner in the UK and xenophobia hit high. I'll never forget when Brexit happened. It was kind of funny and bizarre to me at the same time. And the reason for this was because, and when I say it happened, I just mean it was voted, it won the percentage. I had a lot of white colleagues come to me and just be like, I've never been scared like this. They're telling me to go home. Like basically, it was as if someone took a spread of like what other races go through and dripped it on people of the same complexion, and they were just like, what is this? I've not been in this world before. Why are people telling me to go home? Why are people recognizing now that I'm not from this country? Why are they, you know what I mean? And it hit on another level, and it was concerning, but it was just weird. And then it happened again once COVID came, where people were absolutely racist and evil towards Asian people. And there was a story where this woman was explaining what happens to her, and I'm butchering it, but basically she was telling her friend, a Black friend, and he was like, yeah, that's me every day. And she was like, she couldn't stand it for a day, and he's like, that's my life. And she just started crying. Like, what do you mean? It like, oh yeah, they don't want to think they're crossing the roads, they're calling you names, calling you dog, whatever. And it's like, yeah, this is a season for you. This is a lifetime for me. This isn't something I can hide from. This is just I can't go to certain neighborhoods. If I look in different countries and I want to go on holiday, I have to then shrink them. Like I have to just shrink them. And so it's interesting. But oh yeah, the question was still to you.
Yeah. Answering your question. Obviously, I don't go anywhere near through the same level of microaggression as someone of color, because I get away with being white. Yes, I look like I have a little bit of a tan, especially in summer. They call me Mediterranean, whatever that means.
Exotic.
Exotic, yes. He's an exotic creature. But I certainly have fallen trap of the myth of meritocracy, for example, where there are statements that are put out there which assert that race doesn't play a role in life success or in the progression career within the workplace, for example. But then if you look at the people that are progressing forward, are people that will get along quite well with the management, for instance. And this is explained quite well in The Loudest Duck, which is an excellent book about this specific topic. But of course, not being British, not being from this country, there is a certain level of differences that I have with the management or with the leaders within the companies I've worked in. So it has had an impact. It has played a factor. But I certainly have also observed microaggression in action. And this I remembered of when I was reading the book, because the author talks about her husband being in a hospital and a nurse, 3 nurses, as a matter of fact, unable to put a cannula inside the husband's arm to draw some blood from it. And the first nurse comes around and says, oh, I can't see your veins. And it puts the blame of not being able to put a cannula on the patient because they can't see the blame, because the veins, because the person is black. And then the second nurse comes around and the second nurse says, oh, I can't put the cannula in because the skin is too thick. And this is like some ancient racial thing that has been clearly coming on until now. And this particular example reminded me of an instance that happened when I was at hospital with a friend who was brown, and they were unable to put a cannula in, throwing exactly the same problems or exactly the same reasons. And I'm just watching and I'm thinking, hang on a second, this has got nothing to do with a person being brown. It's because you're utterly incompetent in being able to put a cannula in. Yeah. Don't blame the person for having a different color skin. And I can appreciate that maybe her training as a doctor or as a nurse, whatever she was, I can't remember, may have not allowed her to learn different techniques or different ways, or to have the practice. That's fine, I can understand that bit, but don't blame someone else for the color of the skin and blame them for the inability of being able to put a cannula in. That is
so, like, when you say that, the thing that's so curious or interesting to me is imagine, I don't know how I'd feel if I went to a hospital and they told me like the truth with it, where it's like, we're not trained to deal with people of color like you. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know what to do next. And I think of an example which is lighter for people who are sensitive to the facts of these conversations, which is barbershops. And it can go both ways. If a white person goes to black barbers with straight silky hair or whatever, and they said, can you give me a haircut? And they don't point to anything that's on the numbers or in the pictures, they'll be like, I don't know what to do with this, right? Unless it's a fade or some certain types of cut, or which is specific to our hair, they might get turned away from it. And vice versa, if I go and I'm like, I have, what is it called, sensitive skin and stuff, and I get razor bumps, and you can't just use a scissors and a razor on me, it's totally different. They're like, we don't know what to do here. And that is weirdly more directly recognized in those circumstances. But when you go to a hospital, it's been studies where they think that people of darker skin are more magical, so they're stronger, they can deal with more pain, and thus they're more likely to, like, the higher occurrence of C-sections happens with black women because they just assume they're good with pain. And it's weird because then you start realizing how many things are just a statistic that are due to people not understanding or having maybe institutional racism, whatever, in stereotypes ingrained that then force like a whole standard of living to be different, and it's not even recognized or acknowledged or even considered to be the option. So if someone came in and they told you, by the way, the reason I don't know how to put this cannula in is because I've never seen skin like yours, done it, I'm used to seeing where it's very easy to check it, and so to me it feels like it's thicker, it seems like I can't see your veins, and it's just things I'm not used to, versus them blaming you. And I don't know.
So you touched on that topic about there is this belief that people of color can endure more pain. So this was discussed in the book. I haven't covered it in this episode because there is so much to cover. But I highly recommend that anyone that finds this interesting or useful takes the book and listens to the full book, because there is so much in that I wasn't able to cover. But it is a fact that that's the case. But also, in addition to that, touching on statistics, women of color at childbirth they are 4 times more likely to die than white women. This is in a hospital. This is in a UK hospital.
Yeah. This is, so you're taking what I've already heard and actually thankfully backing it up with facts, because I'm always like, I've heard it somewhere and I've read it and I know it's true. I just don't have the reference to hand, which is hilarious because I always want. But I like this. Please, audience, fact check me. Fact check everything I say. If you just don't believe it, you find it disbelief. I might have got something slightly altered, but I'm pretty sure I'm right, because it's not that I didn't do the research. It's just that I've done it previously and it's just ingrained in my head where I know this. And I was like, it's C-sections, but you're like just deaf. I gave them life at least. I was like, maybe they just cut them open. You're like, no, they'll die. And that's crazy. And it's actually very scary because I'm an uncle. I have a lot of family, right? And every time they have to go in for something which is minor to certain races, it's major to mine, because the likelihood is they'll think we're magical. They'll think we can endure more pain. They will ignore when they're like, I need some meds or whatever. And it's these things which they'll say, I'm not racist, which is fine. You don't need to be racist to be hurting me. But you are doing something wrong and it's causing deaths, and it's not expected to be acknowledged, because if I always think of it, it's like the kid being beaten up is being told to be proper while they shout for help.
Yeah.
Like, stop shouting so loud, lower your voice. Man, look at you, you look scruffy. They are punching me in the face right now. They are ganging up on me. Yeah, but you're there making a fool of yourself because you're not in and all this. Look, you're bleeding from your eyes. It's like, I'm sorry, let me have some decorum while I request some assistance, please. And it's just insane. Yeah, I don't know.
And this brings us to the final topic that we're going to be covering in this podcast, which is topic number 4, white privilege. Now, you may have heard this term before, or maybe not. So we're going to be covering first what it means. White privilege refers to the fact that white people have an advantage in society that others do not. White supremacy is the belief that people with white skin are superior. And understanding that white privilege is a thing is important. Not only it helps to build empathy and we are in a better position to be supportive, but it also acknowledges it and it validates the experience and memory of thousands of people. So in other words, we end up gaslighting their experience and invalidating them when we don't acknowledge that us white people have an advantage just based on the color of our skin.
I think I mentioned in the previous episode about white benefit, where if you tweak the name of it, it's much more digestible for people. But if you say it's a privilege, like, I can't, impossible, not me, which is weird, because but then we have...
It is true, right? Like, as a white person, I know that just based on the color of my skin, I've got a privilege that if I walk down the street, it means that I don't have to worry about being able to find a barber. I don't have to worry about being refused from service, and those are all little things that they add up, but it is a privilege.
Weird. It's like the opposite of the micros, where it adds up in a beneficial way. But you're right. It's like it's basically tailored towards your experience. It's like life tailored to white, which is the thing that gets me, is that it's global. It's not, because I think in my head, oh, is it West? But it's like, no, because you go to another country, maybe in South Asia, and you're still in the top of the pyramid. Right? The privilege is constant. It's constant. You go to Africa, it's constant, and it's just it's an impact. But it is, I think that's it. They're saying acknowledge it exists, because there was so many jokes that acknowledged it before. Whereas, like, we have the white friend who can talk to the police, right? We have the white friend who can get us in here. Use your white voice. Like, use anything in that realm to advance. Change your name slightly. Do these actions that just whiten you, and then even bleach your skin, right? All these things that will give you a leg up, which is, in turn, if you're just born white, you're like, well, hit it. And then you're gonna ask them, would you like to switch race? And if you can find the very minority who'd be like, I'd do it for the fun, so they could say the N-word or something, but wouldn't do it for the life, because you like not being like in those circumstances. I don't know. It's
and as you said, it is let's call it like a pyramid, like you suggested. And there is almost like those different levels, right? So you've got the white man, then you've got the white woman, and then almost like beneath that you got a black man. And then if you look at it all, the one person which is at the most disadvantage is women of color, like black women.
Yeah.
And
no, even, yeah, you're right.
They are paid the least. When you look at pay grade, they are treated the worst. And it goes back to the place in society from tens or hundreds of years ago, like hundreds of years ago, when we were looking at slave plantations and how they used to be treated back then. That treatment has transposed into how we treat them in society today.
Okay. So I was talking with my sister recently about this, and it was basically this discussion was more about not does it exist, but it exists, but then what? And there's this balance where people of color have to find for yes, this exists, however, it shouldn't limit me. But I realized that conversation ends up being very, I don't know, counterintuitive, or like it's the best way to make people clash on themselves, because there's some people who will start saying, yeah, but I'm fine. And that's not the conversation we're having. You being fine doesn't change the fact that it's kind of, if I look at it as a graph and I see statistics and I see these outliers, and the outliers are all saying, but I'm okay. And you're like, you're an outlier. Do you not understand this? Why are you acting like you're the norm? But I'm fine. Y'all should be up here with me. I'm an outlier. And it's weird because you'll hear that from some celebrities, someone who don't empathize with, no, the grouping. If you look at the bell curve, if you look at whatever, just you're an anomaly. Stop acting like that's what is standard and don't make that the conversation. And yes, it's this fine balance of acknowledging this exists, but also not saying, and therefore I am forever in this situation. And it's kind of sucky because the way to do that, so most people of color have had that conversation with their parents where the world is going to be harder for you. And it's weird because I see celebrities who have made it, who still got that conversation when they were younger, right? Like, you're about to be coming through this, and they're like, I made it, I'm rich, but I still know that I have to work at least twice or 7 times as hard to get the same roles as my counterparts. You see what I mean? And then there's this weird thing where if they don't talk about it until they're successful, people just assume it never happened with them. And they're like, no, I got shut down in front of these doors and I just closed my mouth and kept trudging. And it's like, is that what we want it to be? Is that the standard, the foundation that we want to have? It's, I guess, yeah, what you said was basically key. And in understanding why white privilege is important, it at least builds the empathy, and you can be way more supportive due to acknowledging and understanding it. And I think this, for everyone who hears it and just assumes, this is the thing, people love to assume, right? You hear white privilege, be like, I am privileged. And then you'll make a list of things that you just assume is all of it. And the thing is, you're probably still bound for a surprise, because you'll just be like, I can get into clubs, I can get my hair cut, whatever, until it comes to the day when it's like, oh, I won't die today because I'm not, you know what I mean? Like, there's also the big ones that might not be considered. So look into it. Like, you'll see how it really invalidates, and try and take those, someone else's shoes, like they say, and just, like, I think I said this in another episode, imagine where what you disbelieve is true. And what does that actually mean? Because that's the world a lot of people live in, the one that is just so extremely upsetting that it just can't be true. Like, and that's like why they made When They See Us and these other films. And it's like, people went through that, people go through this all the time to today. It's not fixed just because it's not talked about as much, and therefore it's something that's worth for given the time, attention, and effort to try and familiarize yourself with, and then reflect and adapt and execute actions that will help others.
So because it's me and I always do this, I've jotted down some examples from the book just to give context and make this a little bit more digestible.
Okay.
So this is what white privilege means in some examples. So not being 40 times more likely to be stopped and searched by the police. Not having people cross over the road when they see you in fear that you may attack them. Not being 4 to 5 times more likely to die at childbirth. not having to worry about your child attempting to lighten the skin to avoid racial bullying at school, not having your entire race, religion, whatever it is, stigmatized when there is a terrorist attack, not having to Google neighborhoods that aren't racist when you're looking for a place to live with your family, not having to travel 140 miles to find a hairdresser that is trained to work with your hair, not having to walk into a local beauty store and not finding a single foundation that matches your skin tone, not being assumed that you're a criminal just because you're wearing a tracksuit, not being assumed that you don't belong in a first-class carriage, not having the police called when you're waiting in a business for a business associate in a coffee shop, not being 4 times more likely to be detained under the Mental Health Act, and not having to send 80 to 90% more applications to get a response from your employer just because of your ethnic background or because of your name and what it sounds like.
So this is exactly what I mean by, if you have a definition in mind, please look it up, because these things, I'm like, oh, I didn't know that. 4 or 5 times more likely to die at childbirth. Like, I don't even think of that. Like, oh yeah, people grow up and won't ever have to consider lightening their skin. They're getting tans out. Right? They're like, let me darken it. Oh my gosh. Yeah, and it's true. When it came to the having your race or religion stigmatized due to a terrorist attack, didn't you notice in the news, and this is like just standard now, where a terrorist attack is typically committed by someone who's got white privilege, it's not called terrorist attack. I remember a local MP was stabbed to death and there was like, an attack has happened. But the moment that person, if they were brown, a terrorist attack would have happened. I was like, that's literally terrorism. What's the definition of terrorism? They did it, and they'll even shout, I did this to terrorize. And they're like, shut up.
Or when there is a white gunman in the US that shoots children in a school, it's called a gunman. If the person was by any chance brown or black, suddenly it'd be a terrorist attack.
Oh, 100%. It's and I don't know if which generations feel this, but I know, at least for myself, I'll talk for myself. When I see the news and you heard some atrocities happened, you brace and you hope that it's not your race, because if it's your race, you're just given racist fuel, right? They're like, this is what they do. So you're like, please do not be black. Phew, they were black. I don't know what they were. Like, don't be any color, because it's that stress. It's that you're about to get stigmatized. People are going to look at you and associate you with that, which is what I don't see happen. Like, no one looks around. There's so many white people and be like, maybe they're the ones who did it. And there's so many serial killers, high school shooters, all of that, but it doesn't become a generalized stereotype, right? But when things like COVID happened, and when atrocities like 9/11 or things happened, that whole, even the incorrect ones, just Sikh, doesn't matter, Punjabi, Hindu, does not matter. They all just get blanketed as terrorist, which is insane. And yeah, there's a lot of things that I hadn't even remembered / acknowledged when it comes to this. Like, yeah, for me, I live in London, so I have hairdressers that are trained to work with me within close proximity. But
You'd
when
be screwed where I live.
away, oh no, I'm screwed most places away. Like, when I go on holiday or anything, I'm about to go through some turmoil, and I just bring my own clippers. Like, I don't have time for that. But it is true. It's yeah, it is weird though. It's like, and I think, of course, you could do it with class. But if you take 2 people from the exact same circumstances, make them twins who are both adopted into one family, and they go through life at the exact same time, but they have, let's say, the same personality. Let's not even differentiate that. Someone will open doors for one and have closed doors for the others. And I think this is still true to pretty privilege, which I've had conversations where people are convinced it doesn't exist. And I'm like, you do understand that you keep getting free coffees from Starbucks and all these things that are like, yeah, the world is nice. I'm like, it isn't. It isn't. And so you'll see, if you look it up on YouTube and stuff, you'll see where people who previously had pretty privilege have it removed, and people who didn't used to get it. And it's heartbreaking for both, because if you had it and it's gone, you realize a lot of things that happened for you was because of the fact that you look good. And you're like, but I thought it was just genuine. I've never been outside of myself to acknowledge this. And I've heard this response to it. I don't like the idea that that exists. So they just ignore that it exists. But then if you've never had it and then you get it, it's kind of aggravating, because it's like, and for some people, not all, but it's like, are you kidding me? Like, there's times you might have fallen and needed help and no one was there. And now that you're pretty, everyone's there. And you're like, I'm still me. You know what I mean? My core is still me. So now I'm just aware that everyone's just wrong. You know what I mean? I don't want to curse, but it's just everyone. It's insane how much I was left on my own because of how I look or something. And so it's so yeah, there's white privilege, there's free privilege, there's a lot of different male privilege and different privileges that without the acknowledgement and then action from the acknowledgement to like help others, it just grows and is a dark place for some people to just exist in, based on something they haven't control mostly for. Like standards or thing, or yeah, you're just born with the card you have, but you can have an ally or you can have a silent enemy in a sense. I don't know.
No, you're right. And I think the other one that really stands out for me is the not having to send 80 to 90% more application. And that for me stands out because I once observed in my previous workplace, someone looked through CVs and looked at one CV and said, I don't think they will fit in with us. It's not the right kind of person that we need to hire. And then you go look at the name, and it was a name that was clearly of African descent. And I was just like, I looked at him, I was like, WTF? Like, are you literally just like blatantly racist? And that person got away with it just because, you know, there wasn't a way to report, there wasn't a way to point out that it was that was wrong, and probably at the time I wasn't mature enough to be able to step in and give them a piece of my mind, which I will probably do nowadays. But it's crazy that we are in a world today and people getting rejected just on the basis of the names, but it does happen, and acknowledging it and recognizing that it is something that is a reality of today's world is important to ensure that we show that we do understand it, so that we can become allies and we can move to a space where we can be supportive and perhaps one day get to a space where this doesn't happen anymore.
We wait. We wait and we see. But yeah, it's well, it's educational, and that's why we're here. This is why we make this podcast. I like learning and discussing. So I always say this to the audience: please share things that you've learned. Please share things that you might have understood or mindsets that you previously had, because it is all about growth. And if you think you're the best or you think you're perfect, there's no room for growth, which is a funny trick I've seen people use on people where they're like, what do you rate yourself? And they're like, I'm a 10. And they're like, okay, so do you think you can get better then? No. There's always room for growth. I'm improving myself. I'm like, how are you improving yourself if you're a 10? That's the top of the scale. It doesn't even make sense there. You've made yourself an illusion where you're already at the top of it. How can you grow more? And so yeah, I guess this, try and assess some interactions you may have had with people in your past or present or the last week or so. Everyone's going through something different. We have just now finished Black History Month, but I think in terms of just all racial cultures, histories, and discrimination, those aren't a monthly thing. This isn't 1 month and done. It's ongoing. That's why this episode and this even theme will continue, because it's just something that is important regardless. Funnily enough, since this is the second part of this, I now need to read the book that I've just discussed for 2 episodes. So I look forward to doing that. There's another book that we will be coming up with. I'm not going to mention it because I tend to mention books and they might be like in 10 or 12 episodes, but I'll tell Valeria and we'll get to it. And it's very interesting in terms of a much broader, less strict on racism view, but you can look forward to that coming. I won't give any hints. It's just about culture is the only hint I'll give. But yeah.
Fantastic. And that leaves us with what we covered. So in the first episode, we looked at whether racism is still a problem. And we looked at racialized fragility and anti-Blackness. And in this episode, we looked at microaggression and white privilege. We do hope that you've enjoyed this episode and this book summary by the Good Ally from Nova Reid. Again, highly recommend that you get yourself a copy and go through the actual full content. There is so much more in there, and it's truly educational. I will give a warning that it can be triggering, so make sure that you pace yourself as you go through the book.
Nice warning.
If you have a suggestion for a book that we should cover or read, please do reach out. We always love to hear from our audience, and we love to go through books that we have not come across before. You can get in touch with us through our website on www.theneedlemovers.xyz, or follow us on our Instagram account at the.needle.movers. And of course, we also have a TikTok and a YouTube account where finally Mark is going to be releasing some videos.
Yeah, we found a way to make me do it. I don't know how, but I'm here for it. I'm here for it. Wait, no, I'm not even going to show the background thing for the video watchers. Oh yeah, we're also, if you're seeing this, then we should be on the screen. Maybe, we'll see. But yeah, and of course, you know what to do when you go and find us on anywhere. You need to give us that nice rating. And if you have feedback, please give us the feedback too, but keep the ratings high and the feedback constructive. and that way we can also keep making material and content that is useful and relevant to yourselves and to our previous younger selves, as always. I, of course, have been your host, Mark Jasons.
And I've been your co-host, Valerio, and as always, till next time.
Adios.